Welcome back to It's Not Normal, the podcast, episode 10. Today, we're going to be talking about why our happiness threatens the narcissist in our lives. If you've been enjoying these podcast episodes and the topics that I've been talking about, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. I'm putting out a new episode every week, along with a ton of other content here and on TikTok, and your support goes a really long way. I'm working my butt off to keep this conversation going because I see how much of this resonates with so many of you. Let's get into the episode. I want to start off by revisiting narcissism, what narcissism is. Narcissistic Personality Disorder is a mental health condition in which an individual has an inflated sense of self-importance. Narcissists are extremely self-focused, and they approach most situations from the viewpoint of how does this affect me? That being said, I want to kind of bring it back to some of my earlier accomplishments. I'm talking pre-K to 8th grade. Most of my personal accomplishments throughout this time in my life were academically centered. I was winning the science fair. I was on the student council. I made the basketball team. A lot of these achievements were kind of taking place within the confines of my elementary school. And I remember these accomplishments being celebrated and supported by my parents, my narcissistic parent included. And now I kind of fast forward to my early adult years when I'm 21, 22 years old. And especially after I moved out of my family's house, my achievements were starting to go beyond just the walls of a classroom. As I was starting to pursue things that felt truer to me, I was trying to take steps to create a life that I wanted for myself. And I no longer felt like I was responsible for catering to the wants and needs of other adults in my life. I was kind of prioritizing myself for what felt like the first time. And so, 6 months after Brandon and I meet, we take a cross-country road trip, which had been a dream of mine for years at that point. We get back and we start a business together. After working so hard with this business for over a year, we're able to start leasing my dream truck, which I had been fantasizing about since the 6th grade. A couple more years go by and we get married. All of these really positive life sort of highlights, I guess, were celebrated by me and some people in my life, but not my parents. More often than not, they were sources of tension between me and my parents. They had a negative impact on our relationship. And reflecting on these accomplishments, I guess the biggest difference between them is that my earlier years, from pre-K to 8th grade, I was young, I was impressionable, and I was dependent on my parents. Also, these kinds of accomplishments, like, winning the science fair or making the basketball team, objectively were positive things. And I also needed my parents' help to accomplish these things, where they would help me with my project. They would buy me the board that my information would go on. I would practice with my narcissistic parent before basketball tryouts so that I was prepared for tryouts, so that there was a higher likelihood of me making the team. And so in some ways, my personal accomplishments when I was younger were also a reflection of my parents and maybe the time that they put in or the effort that they put in. And this, I think, also kind of helped to perpetuate the image that narcissists and even enabling parents can be so obsessed with, where, to coaches or to parents or to friends, whoever it might be, that looks good. That's a good reflection of your family, where it's like, oh, your kid is accomplished. They're doing well in school. They're an athlete. They're all of these things, right? That makes my parents look good just as much, if not more, as it makes me look good. And so these accomplishments, I think my parents, in one way or another, were able to either be directly involved in or they were directly benefiting from. Now, to kind of contrast that to my personal achievements in my early adult years, taking a cross-country road trip. This was something that I had dreamt about and kind of fantasized about for years before I had ever done it. I had a book where I would write down all of the different stops that I wanted to make along the way and the miles in between them and how long it would take to get to each place. And This was something that was kind of like on my kid bucket list, I guess, and I didn't understand until I was in my 20s how attainable something like this could be. But as I got a little bit older, I started to realize that it doesn't necessarily have to be this once in a lifetime thing that you wait to do until everything lines up. Sometimes you just have to go and figure things out along the way. And that's exactly what I did. But, that being said, there were times when I was younger and I was kind of talking about wanting to do this where I entertained the idea of taking this trip for the first time with my narcissistic parent, with my entire family. And, there were times when I thought that this was going to be like a family vacation, like a family outing. And that's fine. But as I got a little bit older, I started to realize, especially after I started to kind of break out of this narcissistic relationship and I was gaining a little bit of outside perspective, it wasn't my responsibility to hold off on things that I wanted to do in my own personal life until other people who maybe wanted to experience these things also were ready or willing to do those things. And that was kind of a hard thing for me to unlearn, I guess, or for me to truly feel, because having grown up in that kind of environment where, if we all want to do this thing, but only one of us can go, then none of us should go, right? If we're going to do something like a cross-country road trip, we should do it together. And if we can't, then we shouldn't do it at all. That was kind of the mentality that I grew up around. And so thinking of doing something like this on my own, even though I knew that my narcissistic parent wanted to do this at some point, even though they weren't making any real effort to make it a reality, was a little bit hard to manage. But I started to understand that, I am my own person, I'm an individual, and I'm capable of making these decisions. If this is something that I want to do and I'm prepared for, then that's enough for me to justify my decision, even if I'm just justifying it to myself. So this was such an exciting, happy time for me because, again, this is something that I was dreaming about for a really long time, and now it was finally happening, and it was happening with someone who I was falling in love with. And what a better way to experience something like this, as adventurous as this, as someone who shares your same kind of approach to life and who had been wanting to do this themselves for some years. The positivity and the happiness, I guess, that kind of accompanied the thought even of taking this cross-country road trip was also kind of matched with a lot of negativity and tension. I was isolated, I was guilt-tripped, I was shamed by my narcissistic parent. And the reason I think for that is because narcissists have no empathy for other people. And so even if they claim to love and to care about you, seeing you happy doesn't necessarily trigger any positive emotions within the narcissist themselves, especially if they're not the cause of that happiness. People talk a lot about narcissistic supply and what they can gain from other people. And if they're not the center of attention, if they're not the cause of whatever happiness is being experienced, if the spotlight is not on them and they're not directly benefiting in any way from whatever it is that's happening, they have no reason to be happy about it. And I think that was exactly the case with me with this road trip, where maybe my narcissistic parent was under the assumption that this was something that we were going to do together, and it didn't matter how long it took. This was going to be something that I waited around and I did with them, or maybe I never did it at all, because maybe my narcissistic parent would never have gotten there and actually taken the steps to do that. But that meant that I should have never done that either, because they didn't do it. And so now I'm really excited about this thing that my narcissistic parent could have been excited about. They're not directly benefiting. They are losing control because I'm going to be physically distancing myself. There's no positivity in that for them. And I think one of the hardest parts for me was, not feeling comfortable going to my parents and talking about kind of our game plan. This is the route that we plan on taking. This is where we're thinking of sleeping or stopping. Are there any places that you think we should really go to that we shouldn't miss? I remember wanting to, call my parents and say, oh, we drove this many miles today and we saw this animal today, or let me send you a picture of this really beautiful view that we just passed. And instead, I had to kind of pretend like it wasn't happening. I couldn't reach out to them. I couldn't pick up the phone and share any of these really positive, exciting, adventurous moments in my young adult life with my parents, nor could I ask them for any kind of advice or reassurance if I was in a place that I didn't know, or maybe I was feeling a little homesick, whatever it might be. There was none of that in terms of my relationship with my parents. And so that was really upsetting. And now Brandon and I get back from this road trip and we start a business. Now, Brandon and I are the only two people in this business. We own, we operate it, and we are doing everything from sending out the emails to making the sales and delivering the product at the end of the day. And I was so proud of this because it was an idea that I had when I dropped out of college, and it was something that really resonated with Brandon. And anytime you take an idea and you make it into something real, and now all of a sudden people are finally starting to actually respond to it and to engage with the things that you're putting out into the world, it's such an amazing feeling. And I remember being so happy and so proud of us. All the while, it was as if this business never existed to my parents. There was minimal, if any, support shown throughout the years that this business was our focus. And again, I think the reason for that is because narcissists are incredibly insecure. They're very competitive, and I think their low self-esteem and that insecurity kind of drives them to that competitiveness where they feel like they have to be better than everyone else, or like they have to be involved with everything that someone in their life is doing. And I remember thinking when we signed the lease for the studio, this was after I had moved out, I remember thinking to myself, I never would have been allowed to do this had I still been living with my narcissistic parent, because I would have been met with guilt trips and shame telling me, I can't believe you're doing this thing that you know I would want to do, but I can't do for whatever reason. Granted, those reasons aren't my fault, right? Everyone is capable of making whatever decisions or changes in their life that they want to. And so if you want to do this thing, it's like, okay, go and do this thing. But you shouldn't prevent me from doing something that I want to do simply because you want to and you're choosing not to. And I think that happens so often with narcissists and their children. I know that was such a common theme for me throughout my childhood. And so I felt lucky to be out of that environment so that I could actually start taking these steps to creating this life that I wanted. And so I was so proud, and I wanted to share these accomplishments with my parents. And I just remember feeling like I couldn't, because the better I did and the happier I was and the more successful I was, I felt like the worse it would be between my parents and myself, where they weren't happy necessarily for my success or proud of me for starting a business and now supporting myself. They would be upset that they weren't involved. They would kind of make me feel like a bad person because I was doing all of this without them, because they're not directly benefiting from this in any way. And so after Brandon and I worked for well over a year, and we worked hard, we kind of needed to upgrade from the Nissan, and it came time where the lease was up and we had to pick a new vehicle. And we were actually able to start leasing a pickup truck, which it was the same pickup truck that I had seen when I was in 6th grade on my way home. I saw it in a car lot on my way home, and I was like, wow, this is like my dream vehicle. One day I will be driving one of these. And so our business is established, and we're working harder than either of us had ever worked before, and we're finally able to do this thing. And I was so excited. I was thinking about little 6th grade me when I was driving it off the lot, just kind of being here now and saying, like, you did it. Like, you got here. You're sitting in this truck right now, and you are driving it off the lot, and you did it all on your own. And it was such an amazing moment for me, and I was over the moon, and I could not wait to kind of share this excitement with the people in my life closest to me. And I remember driving up to my parents' house, after we got the truck, to show them, because not only was this a personal goal of mine, but it's a massive accomplishment, in my eyes, to be able to, especially having grown up without ever having had like a reliable vehicle or anything like that. I was always kind of bouncing between cars. One was in or out of the shop. Something was wrong with it. And I was so happy to have made a responsible decision and to feel like, what I'm doing is working, and I'm able to support myself now, and I'm making these really adult decisions, like this is something to be proud of. And I remember pulling up to my parents' house, and when they came outside, I was met with such a mocking sort of energy where, growing up, my parents never had a new car or a leased car. I was kind of conditioned to believe that the cool or the right thing to do was to get a really old truck or a car that had, it didn't matter how many hundreds of thousands of miles on it. And it was kind of like the cool thing where like, oh, if things go wrong, it's like, that's what gives it character. And like, I'm going to know how to fix all of these things. And people who had a new car or a leased car, or, I mean, looking back now, it was just people who made more responsible decisions, I think, some driving something that's a little bit reliable, doing a little bit of research before you buy something. That was kind of painted in a really negative light where it's like, that's like the prissy thing to do. You know what I mean? Like, oh, look at those people in their shiny new cars. It was like they were shamed. And it was the same thing working, in the studio where it's like, you shouldn't want to wear gloves, or like headphones or a mask or whatever it is. Like all these responsible precautions, I guess. It was like, you're tougher than that. Like, you don't want to be a little prissy like that. You know what I mean? Like, look at the calluses on my hands. Like, this is something to be proud of. And, I understand like the blue collar work ethic. And I feel like that's something that I experienced for a lot of my life. And I understand the pride in being able to fix a car or to be handy or to be able to do work without gloves on or anything like that. But I think especially when you're dealing with a kid, to kind of encourage that as like the responsible behavior, as the right thing to do to kind of carry throughout your adult life, it's irresponsible in my opinion. And so that was kind of what I was conditioned to believe. And it was hard for me to kind of unlearn that and feel okay leasing a new car, to not feel like I was one of those prissy little people, who was driving a new car or whatever it might be. And so, despite it all, I remember pulling up to my parents' house and coming outside and hearing things like, oh, wow, like that's shiny. Or, I cannot believe that I don't even know what to say. Like, what about this? Like an old truck that I used to talk about, or I can't believe it. I can't believe you did this, oh, and how new, just mocking how new it is or whatever. And, it's like, why can't you just be happy for me? Like, this is the decision that I made in my life. This is what I thought was the right and responsible thing to do. And I'm proud of it and I'm happy about it. Can't you see that? And can't you just put your own opinions aside for once and be happy for me? That's all I'm asking for. But again, understanding narcissism, what it is, the characteristics, what kind of fuels their thinking, they're envious. They're driven to comparison by a number of different factors. And so if I pull up in an objectively more responsible, maybe better vehicle than that of my narcissistic parent, maybe that's viewed as a threat to them. Maybe they don't like feeling like someone is doing better than them, like they're outshining them, like they're taking the spotlight off of them, or they're more successful in one way or another. And so the way for them to feel okay themselves about the situation is to minimize the other person's accomplishments. And I think they did that with me by almost mocking this really incredible personal achievement of mine, to feel better about themselves, to make themselves feel less small. Maybe. And it's so upsetting because you want to share these really positive parts of your life with your parents, right? Because again, I don't think any kid grows up wanting to have a bad relationship with their parents. And naturally, I feel like I thought my parents would be proud of me, for being brave enough to take a cross-country road trip and kind of for like following my gut, right? Or starting a business and having it actually be successful and making all of these decisions to start something that was supporting me, to now having this truck, which I've dreamt about since the 6th grade. Like, in my eyes, these are all really great accomplishments, personal accomplishments. But to them, they're either viewed as threats or you're taking the spotlight off of me and I'm not directly benefiting from any of your personal accomplishments, so why would I be happy about it? I want something like that, but I can't have it, so I'm upset that you do have it. And I feel like that is one of the things that children of narcissistic parents lack the most, and it's probably one of the most devastating, is that reassurance when it comes to making the decision that's right for you, kind of like following your gut, where maybe, if you apply to a really good college, but it's out of state, right? And you're going to have to leave your hometown for the first time, all of your friends and family, everything that you've known, but you feel like, this is really the best decision for me. Like, I have to do this. And I think in the long run, like, it's going to be worth it. Normally, parents, I would imagine, would provide some kind of reassurance where it's like, listen, I trust you, and I'm proud of you for making this hard decision and for doing what you think is right for you. And if you ever need anything, like, we'll be right here, like, we love you, we support you. And that's that, right? That, I think, really kind of instills that trust in yourself that's so important in life. And the difference in a narcissistic family or with narcissistic parents is going away to school might not even be on the table. I remember I was guilt-tripped out of even entertaining the thought of living away at college for a number of different reasons. But if going away to school is not a decision that your narcissistic parent wants you to make, if they're not going to benefit from this in any way, they won't encourage you to do that. And it's so complicated because now you're kind of faced with a situation where, okay, this is what I feel is true to me. This is something that I think can benefit me in my life, but it's a hard decision and maybe I'm a little scared. And the people in my life who love and care about me are making me feel like a bad person for wanting to make this decision that I know is right for me. And they're making it that much harder. And so not only do you have a hard time trusting yourself and actually following through and making that decision, but you have to kind of exist now in this space where it's like, I have this thing that's going on in my life that I know is a positive, and I have to also at the same time just like deflect all of these negative comments, all of the guilt, all of the shame, maybe all of the isolation. It's not grounded in anything healthy. And so I have to just kind of endure it until I don't have to anymore. And that can be a really hard thing to do depending on, your age and your closeness, your relationship with your parents. I think when you grow up with narcissistic parents and so much of this emotional abuse and manipulation starts so young, it can be so difficult to understand that anything is wrong with that way of thinking. So if you maybe are a little bit more easily swayed, right, you already don't know to trust yourself and to trust your gut. And so you're going to make that decision about maybe not going away to school because for your whole life, you've been conditioned to make decisions based off of what other people in your life want you to do. And that can have such long-term effects, not only mentally, but also in your actual life. What are the things that you are going to be able to do? What are you going to be able to pursue if you're never putting yourself first? And I guess it kind of begs the question, what's the difference between a healthy relationship and a relationship with a narcissist? And what I've seen is healthy relationships, you approach a healthy relationship with a certain level of mutual respect and understanding with a goal of connecting with the other person. Whereas in a narcissistic relationship, the goal is dominance. The narcissist wants you to care more about what they think rather than what you think yourself. And I remember it took me a while to realize after moving out of my narcissistic parents' house that everyone has different likes and dislikes and opinions and interests, and a lot of those are not going to align with my own, and that's okay. But there's this element of one-mindedness with narcissists where they view everything from their own point of view, and every other point of view is wrong. But opinions can't really be wrong. That's why they're called opinions. Everyone has had a life of their own and a million different life experiences that have shaped them to be the person that they are. That explains why they feel the way that they do or why they react in a certain way. And they're free to have whatever opinions they want to have Opinions can't necessarily be right or wrong, but I think that is reflective of how black and white it is with a narcissist, where it's either right or it's wrong, or it's yes or it's no. There's no real middle ground or gray area, which is really, you can't avoid that in life. Life is so complicated that there are a lot of gray areas, whether you like it or not. And so I guess, reflecting on these accomplishments, I think the main difference was that I received the happiness and the celebration and the support from my parents, my narcissistic parent included, when I was young and impressionable and dependent. When my achievements reflected well not only on myself and the image of our family as a whole, but as my parents directly, where maybe I needed a little bit of assistance with these accomplishments from my narcissistic parent, and so they felt needed. They were either directly involved or directly benefiting. And the difference between those and the accomplishments of my early adult years was I was no longer dependent. I was becoming less and less dependent. I was physically distancing myself. I was starting a business and I was able to support myself and stand on my own 2 feet financially, which meant that I no longer relied on them for any kind of financial support. I was making my own way, and I was doing things that now were directly benefiting me. And that was it. And so what was there for them to be happy or positive about? What was there for them to celebrate? And thinking about it now, not only were there times when my personal accomplishments were not celebrated by my narcissistic parent, but there were also a lot of times when I was growing up when my narcissistic parent would speak negatively about other people who maybe were accomplishing things on their own that were really impressive, or maybe they were traveling to a different country, or they were going away to a really prestigious school that was maybe a little bit more expensive. And they would speak negatively about these people like they were doing something wrong, like they disapproved of their choices as if they were in a position to disapprove of their choices. And they would say things, like, oh, how much you want to bet like that cost this much and that much, or I can't believe they would do that and leave their family. And so these ideas are kind of instilled from a really young age. And I remember my narcissistic parent also sometimes doubting other people's achievements where, if someone said that they did something really impressive, it would kind of be met with like, oh, I don't know if I believe that. Like, how much you want to bet that they're not telling the truth? Or I can't believe they did that. They probably did this and then said this. And again, it's probably because other people's happiness and success is really viewed as a threat to the narcissist. And so they want to downplay it as much as they possibly can to make themselves feel better. And so, there's this duality that exists in a narcissistic relationship surrounding a lot of really positive, happy, exciting moments. And you've kind of got that on one hand where you're excited about whatever it is and there are a lot of personal positive emotions that you're feeling. But at the same time, you're kind of grappling with a lot of tension and stress and knowing that like, this is the right decision for me and I'm really excited about it. But I know once I do this or once my parents find out about this, this is going to cause a huge fight. Or maybe we're not going to talk for a little while. Or maybe they're going to yell at me and be upset with me. There's this positive and this negative that's always present. And I remember hating that sinking feeling because I didn't want to taint certain experiences. I didn't want them to have any sort of negative connotations because I didn't feel like they were grounded in anything. I just wanted it to be good. And so I guess looking back, the way to combat this, because it is kind of inevitable, I think, when you're dealing with a narcissist, first is to understand the behavior, to recognize where it's coming from. That, for me, has been so helpful because I remember before I understood anything about narcissistic behavior or, emotional manipulation, I felt so much more overwhelmed by the opinions of my narcissistic parent because it felt like I was doing something wrong as a person. And, questioning, even if a decision felt really true to me, am I doing the right thing? Because for so much of my life, I did trust this person and rely on them to have my best interest in mind. And it's entirely overwhelming when you feel like there's just this barrage of negativity surrounding decisions that involve any kind of individuality or autonomy or things that you personally want to pursue that maybe don't cater to anyone else around you. And for me, recognizing the narcissistic behavior of my parent explained a lot, and it allowed me to let go of a lot of that guilt and shame that maybe I once felt. And I don't feel overwhelmed by the thought of these things anymore because I understand that it's not personal, which is kind of my second piece of advice, to understand that the narcissist is not targeting you in particular. They don't want just you to not be happy. They don't want anyone around them to be happy, or at least happier than they are. And so you maybe were just in the crosshairs at the wrong time and you became the target. And whoever you are, whatever your relationship is to them, whatever the personal accomplishment might be, it doesn't matter. I remember telling Brandon that anyone could have walked into the house when I was introducing him to my parents, and my parents wouldn't have liked them. It wouldn't have mattered if they were straight A students, if they were president of the United States, if they were the Pope. It would not have mattered who they were. They were filling a role. And I think that happens so often with children of narcissistic parents, is that they fulfill a role for the narcissist. And so letting go of that and understanding that it wasn't about me, it wasn't about the actual nature of my achievements, that I had nothing to be ashamed of in terms of the decisions that I was making in my personal life. I was just able to understand now that these decisions were my own, that they were no longer benefiting my narcissistic parent. And so that is why, in their mind, these decisions were the wrong ones. And I guess the last way to kind of combat this is to set boundaries. And this is coming from someone who did not know what boundaries were or that I could set them. Because for the longest time, I existed as an extension of my parents. I viewed myself as their kid, and that was it. It was kind of weird to me to actually come into my own and to think to myself, okay, I'm an individual. I'm my own person, and I can make whatever decision I want to make for whatever reason I want to. And I don't actually have to justify this to anyone. That was eye-opening and difficult to actually start to put into practice for some time. But the concept of boundaries now makes so much sense to me. And it's something that has been really beneficial for me throughout my healing journey. And so when it comes to things in your life that you're excited about, that you're happy about, maybe it's good news, maybe it's a personal accomplishment, maybe it's a wedding, something that you want to be just good, that you don't want to taint, right? Set your boundaries. Think about how much you're comfortable sharing with your narcissistic parent. What are you okay with them knowing about your life, about your accomplishments, about your plans for the future? If you've got something planned in advance that you're looking forward to and you tell your narcissistic parent about it, and maybe they're not involved or they're not happy about whatever it is for whatever reason, you telling them about it in advance could be just you giving them a bit more time to figure out how to sabotage it or how to involve themselves in some way that is inappropriate. If you want something like your wedding, right? It's this kind of once in a lifetime, really special day, like you don't do this again. If you want that to kind of just go off without a hitch, if you've got a bit of a rocky relationship with a narcissistic parent who's maybe not too thrilled about the person that you're marrying, maybe consider their level of involvement on that day, because your happiness does not translate to their happiness. And more often than not, unfortunately, it's the opposite, where it's the happier you are, the more upset I am, and the more I'm going to try to find something wrong with this to kind of bring you down, to minimize this positive experience because it's making me feel insecure about myself and my life. Maybe I'm competitive and I'm upset because my wedding wasn't as extravagant or as nice as yours, right? There are all of these really complicated and convoluted thoughts and emotions that I think fuel a lot of narcissistic behavior. And the only way that you can, I guess, exist around this kind of behavior and allow yourself to have any kind of peace of mind is to draw the line somewhere. is to kind of understand what you are and aren't comfortable with and to communicate that to the narcissist, or to even just put those things into practice in your life. I personally don't share anything. I'm currently no contact with my narcissistic parent, with my parents in general. And, even when we were speaking, I didn't share anything with them that I wouldn't be comfortable with the entire world knowing. And so that has kind of been a boundary for me. It's a way to kind of preserve my own inner peace, my own mental well-being, and I guess just my own positivity, surrounding these more positive aspects of my life that I want to remain just that, positive. And it can be hard at first, I guess, to set boundaries because you feel like, especially if you've grown up in an environment like that, you feel like you're doing something wrong, where it's like, who am I to say the things that people can and cannot do, or how involved they are in my life when they're your parents. They should be involved, like they brought you into this world. And realizing that that's not the case, that you can make your own decisions, is incredibly freeing. And boundaries have been a huge help for me throughout this entire journey. So man, with that, that's about all the time that I've got for this topic today, but I will be back very soon with another episode of It's Not Normal. In the meantime, please be sure to like this video, comment down below what you thought of it, or if you have a topic that you'd like to hear me talk about, and subscribe to my channel so that you can get our weekly episodes along with a ton of other content. Every little bit goes a really long way. So thanks, and I'll see you soon.